What's up guys, this is VinylicPuma, back after only 5 months this time, and today I figured I'd just make a video reminiscing about what I still believe is the best Borderlands game ever made, which is Borderlands 2. That and holy crap, it's been 10 years to the day since this game even came out. I think it's kind of funny that there are people that get upset when I point out that Borderlands 2 is the best Borderlands game ever. After all, both Borderlands 3 and Tiny Tina's Wonderlands were promoted using Borderlands 2, and if Borderlands 2 was really that terrible of a game, why use the old game to promote the new game? Wonderlands was promoted using a literal Borderlands 2 DLC, which is a testament to true greatness for any video game in my opinion. I don't think any other game franchise has done something quite like that. Maybe Fortnite has, but even then, that's a cultural phenomenon of its own. The truth is, I wanted to pay my respects to Borderlands 2 as it was and is still a pretty big part of my life. In many ways, it was the peak of the franchise, and I think a lot of that has to do with the time period that game came out in, which was the early 2010s in general. I'm not entirely sure how old a lot of you guys are that are watching this video, but you may hear us old fogies say things like, oh, 1996 to 1998, 2001 to 2002, or 2007. Or if you're a Gen Xer, I'll probably hear the year 1985 thrown out there, and how basically these were the golden years or time periods of gaming with the most genre-defining titles. If you're a Gen Z, or you just don't remember what dial-up internet was, I'd argue that 2012, along with that period from 2010 to about 2013, was easily the equivalent of any of those prior golden years. This time was really the genesis of a lot of really amazing games and the modern gaming landscape as we think of it. It was definitely a pivotal time, and if you doubt me on that, consider some games I'm about to list off here. 2010 alone includes Mass Effect 2, God of War 3, Red Dead Redemption, Fallout New Vegas, StarCraft 2, Civilization 5, Super Meat Boy, and the original Call of Duty Black Ops. 2011 includes The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, Dark Souls 1, either of those are probably the genre-defining RPGs of the last 10 years. The official launch of Minecraft happened in 2011. Total War Shogun 2, which is the best Total War game. Dead Space 2 came out, Portal 2 came out, Saints Row 3 came out, and Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 came out. And then for us Borderlands fans, we have 2012, which includes Borderlands 2, the original Dishonored, Far Cry 3, which is arguably still the best of the modern Far Cry games. You of course have Call of Duty Black Ops 2, and if you want to include a bunch of DLCs for the genre-defining titles of the previous year, I mean, you have a bunch of Skyrim DLC, and you have Artorias of the Abyss for Dark Souls 1. And then of course for 2013 you have the original The Last of Us, and GTA 5 came out in that year. And if you want to include more DLC from the previous games that released in the previous year, you could include Borderlands 2's Assault on Dragonkeep, which basically is what made Wonderlands possible. Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon came out, as well as Skyrim's Dragonborn expansion. I guarantee you there are a lot of amazing games that I probably forgot, so definitely comment your favorites below. You can include some 2014 games if you want, though I may reply to you if you say Dark Souls 2 was your favorite, because I have something to say about that. Beyond just game releases though, that 2010 to 2013 period was arguably the last golden age of PC gaming, where you could basically build a gaming PC and play pretty much every new release and have it be vastly superior to what was on either the Xbox 360 or PS3 at the time. In addition to that, we had the explosion of the YouTube gaming community, as that's when PewDiePie and the first wave of Minecraft YouTubers really took off. And overall, it was just a really amazing time to be alive and playing video games. And I'd argue it was really the last majorly defining time period in recent years. Maybe you could make an exception for 2017 with Fortnite and all, but 2010 to 2013 was really where it was at, in my opinion. In some ways, I suppose it would be nice to go back to that period in time. It's crazy to think how much has changed since then, and in some weird ways, how similar everything is. Aside from battle royale games and VR, not much has really changed in the world of gaming. I guess we have new consoles, but since they're such a pain to get and nobody can actually get their hands on one, most people are playing the new games on their old consoles or on their PC. But I sort of went off on a tangent there. I know a lot of the interest around me is based around Borderlands, and I'd like to talk about my experiences with Borderlands 2, and also just reminisce with you guys about the good old days, as it were. As you guys know, if you've been following the channel long enough, I got introduced to Borderlands with Borderlands 2, and the story behind that was that it was my senior year. I had kind of given up on gaming for a while, and in 2012, my sister got married and all of my relatives and family came down for the event. My cousin brought his special edition R2-D2 Xbox 360, and we played it a little bit, and if my memory is correct, he had a copy of Dishonored because that had just come out, and of course, he also had a copy of Borderlands 2, which had also just come out. It's kind of funny looking back because he was obsessed with Assassin's Creed 3 at the time and wasn't really into looter shooters, but I liked Borderlands 2 so much that it basically got me back into gaming. By the end of the year, I had my hands on an Xbox 360 and a copy of Borderlands 2. So while I wasn't necessarily there at launch, I definitely got involved when the community was still relatively hot, as it were. In the Borderlands community on YouTube back in the day, this was during the Yodislayer era, complete with Yodislayer himself and his legendary weapons guides for the game. You had Morden Afterkill, who I remember watching a lot from basically 2013 to well into 2016. And some of you guys may remember MasterKiz, who was a big Borderlands 2 YouTuber out of Australia. And those three, along with the name you might recognize, Killer6, were basically the personalities for Borderlands 2 on YouTube at the time. And beyond those guys, you had some of the niche channels for Borderlands 2's modding community on YouTube, with guys like eFooly, and of course Deftoned, who helped make a lot of the cool modded Black Rarity hybrids. This was also a time where the original Gearbox forum, which I think is totally defunct now unfortunately, was also a major place to go and talk about the game. It's crazy to think how a lot of YouTube personalities came out of there, ranging from Gathalion and Baru, who would go on to become very popular on Twitch, and I believe JoltStude139 also came out of that community as well, though I remember his YouTube videos more than any of his specific posts on the forum. I think what was magical about Borderlands 2 was that a lot of people back then were doing a lot of really cool things with the game. Everything from making Black Rarity jump guns, to one-shotting Hyperius with the level 1 starter pistol as Zero, to glitching into secret areas, to even speedrunning the game and beyond. As much as Borderlands 2 was this skill-based game where a lot of people in the community were pushing to kill raid bosses as fast as possible or complete various speedrun challenges, it was equally a wild and wacky sandbox, even if that wild and wacky sandbox was never really embraced to its fullest potential at the time. I always thought that was a shame because the way I looked at it, Borderlands 2 in a lot of ways had the best of both worlds as far as RPGs go. It had this semi-competitive online multiplayer community, much like the Soul series of games has, where you have people trying to perform amazing feats like beating the game with a Guitar Hero controller, while simultaneously having this interesting sandbox-like aspect that was reminiscent of Bethesda's style of RPGs. To elaborate on that a little bit, you could create your own experience and manipulate the game in a way that wasn't initially intended by the developers, but was still enjoyable. It's really nice to see today that the community is a lot more receptive of modding in general. I remember it was almost like a cardinal sin to mention that you liked to modify the game. Now we've got the unofficial patch for Borderlands 2, the Borderlands 2 Reborn mod, and beyond. And as I'm sure you're aware, you can still download custom weapon replacers to play around with the community-made unique weapons and equipment, which is pretty cool in my opinion. I remember a couple years back how Gearbox would be asked in interviews a question like, "Hey, can we make guns in the new Borderlands?" And it was always met with this kind of confused, bewildered response of, "Absolutely not." It took me a while to figure out why Gearbox was so resistant to embracing the sandbox, and I think a lot of that has to do with multiplayer and griefing, obviously. I remember back with Borderlands 2 how people made guns that were designed to lock up people's Xbox 360s, but beyond just griefing, I think I understand their original philosophy towards this request from the fanbase. Because if you think about it, Borderlands and other looter shooters essentially boil down to a quest to find the best gun. For Borderlands 2, once you have a max level character, an Unkempt Herald, Grog Nozzle, Magic Missile, and maybe a Sandhawk and a Bee Shield, you basically have the best equipment in the game. And largely, the endgame for Borderlands 2 consists of using this same equipment to blow away the quadrupled health, level boosted enemies of Pandora. The game, in a sense, is over at that point. Sure, you could try a new character, but generally speaking it devolves into Sandhawk Bee Shield, Grog Herald, Norfleet Sham, Flacker Ahab, and other notable overpowered weapon combinations. So the cycle of the player experience is, in effect, going from your dull basic repeater to eventually getting a Norfleet, or getting a double prefix Unkempt Herald, or getting yourself the Pimpernel, the Sham, the Bee Shield, the Fastball, and the other best weapons in the game. Once you've done that, you either do it again on a new character or play a different game. When you look at it from that perspective, it actually makes a lot of sense why there was initially a lot of resistance to modding, especially if the point of your game is to get the best loot and move on. Fortunately, the community got the technical know-how to do the community patch where that eventually evolved into a lot of the mods you not just see for Borderlands 2, but even the pre-sequel and of course, now Borderlands 3. I suppose it would have been nice to see Borderlands 2 have the community patch and various mods for the game way earlier, but then again, it would have also been nicer to have gotten Borderlands 3 in 2016 to 2017, as opposed to 2019 when we got it. At least we got the mods, and a lot of the mods are pretty popular now. Beyond mods though, I don't think any of the Borderlands titles since, including the pre-sequel which came out around a couple years later, have really lived up to what Borderlands 2 had to offer. I'd say that largely comes down to how Borderlands 2 was simply a feature-complete game at launch. It had a decent fan base with virtually no competition in its genre when it released, and it also came out in a time period where gaming was not just the #1 genre on YouTube, but the gaming genre was rapidly expanding on YouTube and across the internet. Addressing that first point, I would define a feature-complete game as a game that is fairly self-contained and pretty much done when it ships out to you or us, the end customers. This is in stark contrast to a lot of the games that come out in modern day that follow this constant stream of updates that feel drip-fed to the end customer and usually restore functions that the developers planned as part of their complete game, but initially they remove it at launch to justify this sense of live updates or whatever. Borderlands 2 without its DLC is a very complete game. I maintain to this day if you didn't have internet and you had an old 360 or PS3 lying around and you went to a used video game store and bought a copy of Borderlands 2's base game, you have hundreds of hours of gameplay ahead of you. Add all 4 campaign DLCs, both Gage and Krieg, both UVHM upgrades with Digital Peak, the Headhunter packs, and the Commander Lilith DLC, and you can very easily double whatever the time you initially invested. Another great example from a game balance perspective would be something like the Bee Shield, which in a more modern title would have likely been released as a part of DLC and or a reward for completing a super difficult challenge. With Borderlands 2, the Bee was baked into the vanilla game itself. And if you think about it, consider other weapons like the Norfleet, the Unkempt Herald, the Lady Fist, the Lyuda, or even something relatively simple like the Slaga. While they're definitely nice to have and make the game more interesting, do you really need the Interfacer, the Becca, the Sandhawk, the Grog Nozzle, the Kitten, or the Magic Missile? Maybe if you're playing with the DLCs and the updates, but for the base game, the Unkempt Herald and Norfleet will pretty much cover you. Ultimately, that's my point with Borderlands 2 being feature complete, and I think that puts it a step up above most of the titles which really need their DLC. Or in the case of Wonderlands, you were basically being drip-fed ascended equipment like the volatile and chaotic items. This of course brings us to our second major point, which is simply that Borderlands 2 had a decent fan base and virtually no competition in its genre. The first Borderlands, while not a mega hit per se, was pretty popular, and while there are I'm sure games that came out before it that did the same concept, Borderlands was really the first to achieve a lot of commercial success. It effectively pioneered and laid out a lot of the groundwork for not just future Borderlands titles, but also the likes of games like Destiny, The Division, and so on. Fast forward to 2012, and not only did Borderlands 2 have a pretty decent-sized fanbase, but it also wasn't directly competing with the likes of Destiny, The Division, and similar titles. If you wanted a fun FPS game that wasn't a multiplayer sweatfest like Call of Duty Black Ops, you were playing Borderlands 2, maybe the original Borderlands, and not a whole lot else. I mean, maybe you could have installed some online multiplayer mods for Fallout New Vegas, but I think even that mod came out much later. This, I think, is largely one factor for why Borderlands 2 remains so popular for so long and even retains a lot of popularity to this day. It was a fairly fresh and refined game that offered something different from a lot of the other mainstream FPS games that were trying to be the next Call of Duty, Halo, or something similar. In some ways, you might argue it offered quite a bit more to a wider variety of the gaming community, as it was not only a fun game to play with others, but also by yourself. Sort of like Fallout 3 with multiplayer and more Diablo 2 than Fallout 76. As for our final point, we have the X factor, which wasn't just YouTube and social media itself, but really the time period in which the gaming genre of videos on YouTube was exploding in popularity. I can guarantee you, if you asked pretty much every 16 to 21-year-old male what kind of job they wanted to have in 2012, it was definitely to be a YouTube gamer. The popularity of PewDiePie, Minecraft YouTubers, and even a lot of online gaming reviewers, whether it be the likes of the Angry Video Game Nerd, Angry Joe, Total Biscuit, JonTron, and shows that a lot of these guys put together, was almost like G4 TV on steroids. There was pretty much some kind of high-quality production for everything and anything you could imagine, whether that be game theories, game histories, game reviews, and I wouldn't be surprised if there were gaming-related food and toy channels. I think there are a bunch of those, by the way. It was actually pretty crazy when you consider a lot of the pre-PewDiePie YouTube stars like Smosh, iJustine, Ray William Johnson, Epic Mealtime, and others basically made gaming channels due to the crazy popularity of the gaming genre as a whole. You had an insane amount of cross-pollination during this time period, not just with the gaming genre itself, but YouTube as a whole was also growing. So much so that today, more people are watching YouTube and independent online personalities for their news, as opposed to legacy mainstream media outlets. Now you may be wondering, how would this surge in YouTube and social media benefit a game like Borderlands 2, that we've established was a feature-complete, solid and refined game out of the box with a respectably sized fanbase and virtually no competition in its genre? Well, I have an answer that would make any aspiring monopolist grin with glee. Complete and total algorithmic as well as market dominance. One of the reasons we tend to get crazy high-numbered video game sequels and even some same-name different game situations like with the new Modern Warfare 2 in 2022 is in part because of the nature of internet algorithms, as well as how the internet seemingly favors the funneling of users towards specific keywords and types of content. When people search or get suggested a video, it usually tends to be the most viewed / engaged with / similar genre type of video. Probably the most absurd example of this is Minecraft, where some kid in 2009 to 2011 watches a bunch of videos on this block-based indie game. It gets fed into the algorithm that this is what users on YouTube want to see. Content creators figure out they can make videos on this game and get some viewership, and then of course this snowballs to insane levels. Minecraft becomes the biggest game in the world, Notch becomes a billionaire after he sells it to Microsoft, and the rest is history. As this pertains to Borderlands 2, like I said, it had the advantage of being a great game with good post-launch support, minimal competition in its genre with a broad appeal, and you could sort of predict that the internet would simply just take care of the rest. There was a demand for Borderlands 2 content ranging from video to art and everything else, and naturally, that's a recipe for massive success and longevity. Something that blows my mind is how not only I was able to make Borderlands 2 videos for years after the game had released, but many of my contemporaries at the time were able to also. And quite a few of them still are making Borderlands 2 videos if you look around YouTube hard enough. So, going back to why I think Borderlands 2 was the best Borderlands game ever made, yes, Borderlands 2 was just that good. And it had, and arguably still has, a lot to offer. Not just for content creators that make videos on the game, but people that love playing and interacting with the community that spawned around the series as well. Or maybe it's just that I'm old and I've got a soft spot for Borderlands 2. Though I do think based on some of my experiences with the newer Borderlands games that while a lot of individual aspects are often improved upon, others are overlooked. Consider Borderlands 2's story and main villain, Handsome Jack. I think we could all agree that Jack was just the better villain when compared to the Calypso twins from Borderlands 3. Though in the inverse, I suppose you could say things like Mayhem Mode and even Wonderlands' Chaotic Gear were better handled than Ultimate Voltage Mode and the OP levels from Borderlands 2. Maybe a good way to put it is that Borderlands 2 is to Borderlands 3 and Wonderlands that Super Smash Bros. Melee is to Smash Ultimate, or really any Smash Bros. Game that will come after Ultimate in my opinion. There's a sort of purity and simplicity to Borderlands 2 that a lot of the newer games I think don't or won't share. And I don't think that's really the fault of anybody designing any of the newer games, since quite a bit of that comes down to nostalgia. I suppose Nintendo could remake Super Smash Bros. Melee with 4K HDR graphics or what have you, but if they fix some of the bugs, would the community complain or support that decision? If they remade Borderlands 2 from the ground up, people might hate it. Just look at the remake and remaster of The Last of Us, for example. Though, I suppose in that case, that game didn't really need to be remade, whereas the remake for Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare was actually fairly well received, despite it being attached to Infinite Warfare initially. Speaking of feeling old, 10 years, man. An entire decade has passed since Borderlands 2. That's so crazy to me. I wouldn't say that it feels like yesterday, but it doesn't really feel like ancient history. Then again, I guess the more I think about it, maybe it does feel like ancient history. It's weird, I associate more recent dates in time as feeling like a long time ago, and yet my memories of this game are much older, yet they still feel somewhat fresh. I don't know if you guys have ever experienced anything like that, but that's how I would describe it. It has actually been somewhat surreal making this video. Around a month before Borderlands 3 came out, I made a commitment to myself that I wouldn't be making any new Borderlands 2 videos after Borderlands 3 came out, and I was going to be done with the game entirely. After all, I had essentially been making Borderlands 2 videos for about 5 years at the time, starting way back in 2014. I don't know if you guys have ever seen my very first YouTube video on the channel, but it's weird to hear myself even speak from back then. If you're curious, I'll link it in the description, but that is my very first YouTube video. I think technically I also uploaded it on another channel that I scrubbed, but that accident build was my first set of videos. That goes to show you how long I was making Borderlands 2 videos. It was pretty much prior to the release of Borderlands the pre-sequel to prior to the release of Borderlands 3, and that whole period of like 5 years. Granted, I had phases on YouTube where it was on and off, but by and large, I really stuck with Borderlands 2 for a long time. So, like I said, it's kind of surreal to be making this video right now, in 2022, almost 8 years later. What's funny though is that the Borderlands community is in a similar place to where it was when I started here on YouTube. Borderlands was on a bit of a decline during and after the pre-sequel, much like Borderlands is now on sort of a decline with Wonderlands. It's definitely not as bad as it was before despite Wonderlands' issues. I mean, we are getting a new Tales from the Borderlands within like the next month, I think. But we are definitely in a bit of a dry period, especially compared to the Borderlands 3 and Wonderlands life cycles. I think as we get further into this console generation and the further away we get from the utter disaster that was the year 2020, a lot of things are going to improve. I remember back in 2008 to 2010, gaming really kind of stagnated, and a lot of that was the result of the financial crisis, and of course the absurd price point of the PS3. But by 2010 to 2011, things definitely picked back up, and I think we'll see something similar in the coming years. And who knows, we may get a new renaissance for gaming, much like that golden period from about 2010 to 2013. As far as I go and this channel goes here on YouTube, I think it'd be best for me to do what I did in my Where I've Been video that I released a couple months back, and not really promise a whole lot at this point. I will say though there are some new games I'm looking forward to, though again, I don't want to make a promise I don't end up keeping. But again man, 10 years. A huge part of my life and maybe yours. I was just thinking about the first time I discovered the sword explosion and I managed to get the vertical grip. It's crazy how I can remember something insignificant like that from like 9 years ago. Guess it made quite the impression, much like Borderlands 2. Otherwise guys, I think that's going to wrap up this particular video. If you enjoyed this video, definitely be sure to tap the like button, subscribe if you're new, hit the bell, do what you gotta do, and as always, and again, take care and have a good one.